Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma231 here, back in today to talk about Oshi, chapter number 129. This chapter is indeed titled Peace, not as in like world peace or like the peace sign or anything, just like a puzzle piece or like the One Piece, that sort of whole deal, right? And I know I haven't posted a lot of videos on this channel, but I figured if I'm going to do anything, I better do Oshi just because that's like my good series on this channel, I think. Like, it's always consistent, I always get it out. And because of that, we're going to be talking about this Oshi chapter, right? This is a very good chapter of Oshi, I think. It really shows a lot into our characters as actors. I know we've seen most of these characters act in the past, but this chapter really gives us a whole lot more in showing, okay, this is how Akane acts, this is how Ruby acts, this is even how Mimcho acts, right? And also sort of how director Gontonda shoots a movie, right? It is all very interesting. But of course, before we actually hop into all of the nitty-gritty details of the chapter, we want to talk about two things. Number one, what happened last time on Oshi? Well, what happened last time is we sort of got the introduction into the roles that everybody would be playing in the 15-year lie, and really the big reveal at the end was that how whenever Ruby was dressed up as how she looked almost exactly the same, and I think Ruby had a line, something akin to like, oh man, jeans are killers sometimes, right? Just sort of saying like how similar they look alike and how it honestly sucks so much just with how the jeans are, right? So it was a little bit of an interesting sort of look at the characters there for a second, right? And the other thing is, just before we actually get into the chapter itself, if you want to hear about all my other Oshi chapter reviews, I've got, I don't know what, about 18 on the channel up at this point. So if you want to go check out what I thought of, like, I don't know, chapter number 119, for instance, it's up on the channel, so you can go check out that and see my opinions there, right? But without further ado, let's start off the chapter, and we sort of start off with the characters in an acting scene, right? At first, you may not, like, sort of, whenever I read it first, I was sort of like, okay, is this just Akane and Ruby just interacting, or are they actually filming a scene? And they are indeed filming a scene, right? We see Akane dressed up as, I forget who Akane is playing, and I honestly don't think it's too important for that whole idea, so I will be calling them by their names of Akane, Ruby, Kana, Mimcho, all of that, even though they are playing different characters, right? I hope that makes sense. So Akane's here, and she's just like, hey, are you listening? And we see that she's saying this to Kana's character, who is just like, oh, yeah, I'm sorry, what was that again? And Akane's just like, hey, I'm talking about the cap. Don't leave your bottle on the table without the cap on it, okay? And Kana's just like, oh, tee-hee-hee, I'm sorry, it's just water, so I thought it was okay, right? Sort of showing how she's playing like a very ditzy airhead, the way that the chapter sort of worded. And Akane is just like, well, absolutely not, right? How can you be okay with that? I don't understand, even if it's just water, right? Sort of just like showing how much she's sort of like aggressive in this sort of character role. And at this point, she's just like, how boorish. And she sort of looks down on Kana's character. He's just like looking down to the ground. And she's like, see, even some of your hair is springing up out of nowhere, making it look strange. That's so stupid and gross too, right? And what I really like about this is we know that these idols are mostly teenagers whenever they're doing this whole sort of thing. So I can definitely see this as how like two high school girls would get into a fight just like, oh man, your hair's, you got a cowlick, that looks stupid, right? It's just sort of that thing I can envision. We see Kana's character like, oh no, what are you talking about, right? Let me just flip it down, right? But Akane's like, seriously, you can't do anything without me, Nino. And apparently Nino is Kana's character, as she sort of just laughs, like, tee-hee-hee-hee-hee-hee, as all of a sudden we see that Mimcho's character walks into the room and says, oh, Takamine-chan, don't tease her too much, will you? Sort of just, she's a very short line, just coming in and say, oh, don't do that, right? And, oh, I guess that's Akane's character, Takamine-chan. That's interesting. And at this point, we see Akane's character go over and sort of just like hug Kana and sort of just like, hey, I'm not teasing her. I'm being harsh because I love her. Isn't that right? And she even starts saying more like, well, I think that naivety of yours is cute, but I'm telling you this because you'll never get a boyfriend if you're like that, right? And Kana's character's like, oh, hee. And she's eventually just like, hey, I'm sorry. And then I guess the director, whoever it is, just yells cut, and we see all of the characters sort of come out of this acting mode, right? There's a lot of really sort of interesting things in there. I think one of the most interesting things is that Takamine-chan, who of course is Akane's character, is talking to Nino, Kana's character. I guess I will be using these names. I don't really know. We'll see how it goes, right? Pretty much just saying that you'll never be able to get a boyfriend like that, when we know in this industry that really isn't like something you want to go do, because of course we've seen what happened with so that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But also, if these girls weren't as famous as of course I was, it probably wouldn't be as big of a deal and as much as a problem, right? And I sort of like here how we see like Kana's character like, oh hey, I'm sorry, right? It like seems all ditzy, but as soon as the word cut is yelled, we see just how instantly angry like Kana's face just becomes, being that is how she normally is, right? And then we see just like Akane's face and Mimcho's face, and Mimcho is very relaxed, being that, yeah, she doesn't really know how to act, but it's a very sort of interesting way to look at it. And then we get some like just general narration just saying 15-year lie, start of filming the first day of shooting, right? Which makes sense. I mean, this is probably one of the initial scenes they're filming, just with these girls in the room. And as all of that goes on, we pretty much just see a bunch of the producers and grips and everything, and they're all just like, all right, hey, check the footage, fix Arima-san's costume and hair, we'll move the equipment actor, so please wait about 10 minutes. And they're like, all right, bring out the props for cut 35. And as all of this is going on and all of the filming stuff is happening, we see that Miyako is walking with a Ruby, who is dressed up in attire. And at this point, oh my gosh, I just have to point out how some of the characters look here, right? Because Ruby, like, if you didn't know this wasn't supposed to be you would not be able to tell at all. I mean, they literally look so similar. And I mean, of course I know why that is, but it's just crazy just how similar Mingo Yorki's making them look here, right? And the other sort of visual thing is, it's just weird to see Kana with long hair playing Nino. It's just something that is just a little off, and you're looking at like, I know what it's trying to say, but it's still weird. But either way, that's how it is. We see Miyako just standing there for Ruby, and she's just like, hey, pay attention to all of your surroundings, Ruby. You have to be on the level of those three too, right? I guess it's really those two, being that like Akane and Kana are like the big guys, right? But either way, we get a little bit of narration just going, playing the role of Ai Hoshino is Ruby Hoshino. Who would have thunk? But as everything's going on, we see that Mimcho's like, so how was it, guys? You guys think I did well? And Akane's is like, hey, I think you were perfectly okay, right? And Kana just says, well, you don't have really any long lines, and you really resemble the character you're playing, so it should really be easy for you, right? It's not going to be that hard to sort of get mannerisms down and to completely act as this character, right? And at this point, we see that Kana just is like, points over to Akane's like, hey, I mean, take a look at Akane's character over there, right? Akane's nasty personality is what's making this character work. And she's like, if she wasn't nasty to begin with, she wouldn't be able to perform this well, right? And Akane's just like, hey, I'm not nasty. Please don't be so rude, right? But Kaz is like, hey, liar, you were looking so happy when you were teasing me. And Akane's just like, hey, that's not true. But we see in Akane's mind, she's just like, oh yeah, I'm totally enjoying just bullying the crap out of Akane here in the movie, right? So this is a really fun thing. I like Akane. I like that. I don't really like Kana. So yeah, if she gets made fun of in a movie, I'm fine with that, right? Not really too big a deal. But at this point, we see that Akane looks over towards the doorway, and she's just like, oh, so they're getting ready to start too, right? And she's like, this will be Ruby's first performance. As we see Ruby, she is sort of walking down the hall to go into the room where the other three are at, and she's sort of just thinking like, hey, it's okay, I read this script so incredibly much in preparation for today, right? I practiced as much as I could. I know I can do this, right? As to where the actions get yelled, and we see the Ruby walks down the hallway, grabs open the door handle, swings it open, is like, all right, good morning, guys, and sort of just like holds up her hand, and director's like, hey, cut. And she's sort of just standing there, and she's just like, what's going on here? But we see, I guess, is like the producer. It's not director Gontonda, but it's just another person on the set. We don't know this person's name, but he's just like, hey, Ruby-san, we're going to reshoot, so please go back to the starting position, right? And we see that Ruby's just like, okay, well, what was up with that? Was I just too lively? As we see, she does it again, and this time she sort of takes her hat off and holds it in her hand, being a bit more calm about it. She's like, oh, hey, good morning, guys. And the next one, she's like, oh, what's going on here? So she's like, and she walks in and says, good morning, guys. Sort of just like does a very enthusiastic, she does even more of an enthusiastic one. And we see this about 5 times until it's eventually Ruby's just like, what's wrong with me? Well, what's going on here, right? And Kana and Akane walk up, and Kana's just like, hey, how many times have you done that line, that short shoot for that one line so far? And Ruby's just like 13, right? Like really down about it, because if she can't get this line, how is she going to do an entire movie, right? And we see Kana's like, so you've been stuck since the beginning here, I see. And Ruby's just like, hey, I can't help it though. This is my first performance, right? Like I don't really know what I'm doing too much, right? And we sort of see a little bit of a line with Mimcho, who's just really nervous about her next line coming up. She's like, so how long are you going to do this? I think I've got butterflies in my stomach for waiting so long for my turn to come up, right? Which, I totally understand Mimcho here. I've been at things where you're sort of just sitting there waiting for your name to be called or not called, or even to maybe be called, and you're just sitting there, right? And you just get so nervous. Am I going to win? Am I going to lose? What's going on here? Am I going to get called, not called? To where, oh, I totally understand what Mimcho's going through here, right? But Kana just says, hey, we're going to keep going until the director is satisfied, of course. And she continues like, hey, I once started a movie of his once before, and boy, was he like very pig-headed. He wouldn't let you go until he thought the shoot was good, right? I don't know if this is like the young Kana, like whenever she was in the movie with Aqua in like the chapter 4 or whatever, or if it's just meant to say that she's also acted in a director Gontonda movie since then. So either way, she's pretty much saying that the director won't let Ruby go and be done with the scene until he's 100% satisfied with what she has produced. And hey, I mean, with who these characters are, I mean, that makes perfect sense all around. But Mimcho's like, so I wonder what's really displeasing him about Ruby's performance, right? And Kana's just is a little blank, just like, I don't really know. As we see that Ruby walks up and to the intermittent producer guy, right? It's the same one we saw before. And she's like, hey, excuse me, could you tell me what to do in more detail? And he's just like, yeah, I'll ask him. As he's on the phone with director Gontonda, who I guess is in a different, like, more production-suited room. For all we know, he could just be at his house eating his mother's home cooking. We really don't know. And he's just like, what, are you sure? Are you sure I can tell it to her like that? And he's like, he turns over to Ruby and he's like, oh, hey, the director said I was dumber. She didn't think about anything, so you shouldn't read too much into this either. And he just said, hey, that's all. And we see that she's just like, huh? What is he talking about? As he's just like, what the hell? He asked me to do this over and over again because I'm not dumb enough for it? And she's just like, very pissed off, just like, he doesn't understand Mama at all. Then yeah, of course, she thinks she knows a bit more about him when she maybe really may not. But we see why the root cause, you said that here's in a second, right? As we see it, she's just like, Mama was always thinking about things. She wasn't dumb. She was just hiding all kinds of feelings. As we see this time, she does it one more time, and it walks in, and she's just like, oh, good morning, guys, and sort of like spreads out her arms, and sort of just like walks in doing like a circle. That's how I imagine it, at least, right? As the director's just like, okay, that's good, on to the next scene, right? And Ruby just like looks at her hand, she's like, what is up with this? What's going on here, right? And something I should have probably mentioned a second ago that I didn't, in this one shot, Ruby has both starring guns activated, right? There's not just one in, what is it, her left eye, if I'm not mistaken, or right eye? I think it's a right eye. I think Aqua's is in his left eye. No, Ruby's is in her left eye, Aqua's is in the right eye. That's what it is. I don't know. You get my point, though. Both of her eyes have the Starengons in them. And she's just sort of freaked out, like, why was that better than all the other ones, right? And we then see Ruby, who's just, not Ruby, Kana's like, sitting next to Mimcho, and she's like, my, that was pretty good, wasn't it? And she's like, well, I mean, that's this director for you. And Mimcho's like, what do you mean by that, right? And Kana's like, well, in the end, Gontonda really just wants to film the real thing. He wants to capture Ai Hoshino's feelings truly into one frame. And she's just like, look, Ruby thinks her acting just now felt right and justified. She added the missing emotion in order to play Ai Hoshino. And Mimcho's like, what missing emotion are you talking about, right? And we see then that Akane is behind them both for some reason. She's just like, anger. I'm sure Ai Hoshino was hiding anger in her heart, right? Which is really just like a sort of very sad line as we see it, because of course we know what Akane has done in the past to sort of get closer to not only Aqua, but to Ai in general during the whole arc where, I mean, she did try to off herself, but that's besides the point. But it's pretty much her just saying that, yeah, Ai definitely had anger in her heart. So really what happened here is that Gontonda said something that he deliberately knew that she wouldn't like to make her pissed off enough to verbally go and be like, hey, I don't like that, to whenever she be able to show the anger that she was feeling, just like how I would have been feeling in that moment. And that's just like so cool. Like, I don't know if cool is the right word to say, but it's like so deceptive and such like a thing where you're like, man, is this really how movies are filmed in the real world? And it's just like, oh my gosh, like it's a very cool idea for sure. And sort of as we see here, the chapter title was Peace. This is the missing piece of Ruby's acting as Ai is the anger inside the heart, which is sort of being built up here. But as this happens, we see Mimcho is just like, oh, anger? Okay, right? And she's just like, all right. But Kana then sort of just explains this. He's like, hey, that's right. The director wanted to tell her from the get-go, but acting depends on emotions, and she needs to understand Ai Hoshino's emotions and be able to pick up on them, right? And she's just like, as expected from Aqua's teacher, of course, and he's just like, their way of doing things is exactly the same. He let Ruby do countless retakes and made her angry on purpose in order to get the missing pieces. There's the explanation for a chapter, right? As we get on to the last page, as Kana's just like, girls, you better watch out too, because that director is a tough nut to crack. As we see the final panel, is just director Gontonda sort of sitting down with arms crossed and I guess looking at the monitor screen, and he's got this big smile on his face because he's filming a movie and he just had, who is it? Yeah, one of the characters, Ruby, do exactly what he wanted to, right? That's just a really awesome idea for a chapter. This is probably one of my favorite Oshinoko chapters in a while because, number one, it is showing us like the direct filming process instead of like going into like a character backstory or whatever, which is nice. But at this point, we sort of know all these characters, and seeing Ruby, seeing how she like did this thing, and also just seeing Gontonda's manipulative side. It's very interesting, and it's definitely much more interesting than last chapter. We're like, all right, here's the roles these characters are going to play again, actually seeing them in those roles, right? I know I haven't really talked about this in the Oshinoko series, but on the channel, I was reviewing Tenmaku Cinema there for a little while, right? Which is another series all about movies and not really acting as much, but just the creative process of making a movie. And that was really the one problem that that series had, was it didn't show a product. While this chapter is a very good example of showing a product with properly built up characters, and that was one of the problems with Tenmaku Cinema, is they weren't really the best of built up characters. But it's just showing how good Oshinoko is, and I am super excited for next chapter, which we don't have to wait long for. It's just a week, which is nice because like the past few Oshinoko chapters, like we had the whole interlude situation, and then we had, all right, this Oshinoko chapter, and then it was like, all right, 2 weeks, next Oshinoko chapter. But we're actually going to be getting one for sure next week, October 25th of 2023. So yeah, this was a great Oshinoko chapter again. And if you did enjoy my review here, like I said, I've got others on the channel. Maybe you wouldn't mind subscribing, liking, doing all of that good stuff. It really helps me out. Like, it really does. A lot more than you would actually think. And yeah, what were your guys' thoughts on the chapter? Leave a comment down below. And yeah, with that, I don't really have too much else to say. Great chapter of Oshi no Ko, and yeah, I'll see you guys next time. This is going to be Glowplasma231 out.